So we can all agree that everybody needs Bitcoin. I think everyone in this room would agree on that. But there are also some people who need Bitcoin a lot more urgently than others. This next panel is called Bitcoin for the Underprivileged. And I'd like you to welcome to the stage our moderator, Joe Nakamoto. Please give him a warm welcome. Let's finish this day off right.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Don't you dare leave. Come inside. This is going to be a fantastic panel. You're in the right place. You've made the right decision. We're going to talk about privilege with the guy from the UK with a British accent who's clearly way too privileged and is dressed like King Charles's foot servant. Yes, I'm about to try and talk about privilege on stage. Okay, with me out of the way, I'd like to invite to the stage first Brindon, all the way from Kampala, Uganda. He's come all the way to Bitcoin country. Give it up for Brindon. Welcome, Brindon. Come take a seat next to me. I'm just going to make sure it's looking privileged enough for you. There you go. Next up, we have none other than Piero Coen of Osmo Wallet, coming all the way from Guatemala. Please give it up for Piero. Bienvenido. I'll do the same thing. Make sure it's privileged. There it is, very privileged. And Mike Peterson, the man who needs no introduction, but we'll do it anyway. The founder of Bitcoin Beach Azonte, his new home, El Salvador. Welcome into the stage. Awesome. So, the title of this panel is Bitcoin for the Underprivileged. Just to get some definitions out the way, privilege is, of course, a cheat code for life. It is something that gives you an advantage or an opportunity based on your wealth, your appearance, could be your gender, could be what you're wearing, all of these things above. And, of course, being underprivileged means you have less of that. I presume that you guys are going to argue for the underprivileged in the Bitcoin community. So I am going to be an annoying journalist. You know, picture me as your mainstream media annoying journalist of choice. And I'm going to argue that Bitcoin is, in fact, for rich white guys sat in America, sat in Europe, Northern Europe in particular, who are chanting hodl, hodl, hodl on Twitter and Nostr and other protocols. And they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth. And all they want to do is get richer and wealthier and more powerful because they are privileged. Okay? I'm just going to put my position out there right now. This is to, set the scene a little bit. But before we go any further, I want to introduce you guys and explain to me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how privileged do you feel? So, for example, my name is Joe Nakamoto. I am a 10 out of 10 in terms of privilege right now. Brindon, over to you.
My name is Brindon Mwiine. I am a 2 out of 10 privileged.
Why is that?
Because the financial system to which privilege is derived was innately designed against me and still is without Bitcoin. If there's Bitcoin in the picture, I'm a 10 out of 10.
That's cool. It goes straight from a 2 to a 10. I love that. Good for you, Brindon. Piero, who are you and where are you on this privilege scale out of 10?
My name is Piero Coen. I'm from Nicaragua and live in Guatemala. And I would say 10 out of 10 in terms of privilege. Thankfully, thank God. Really? Okay. But you've Guatemalan passport, no? Surely that's fewer points on the privilege scale. You can't just walk into Europe, right? That's a privilege. I'm actually exiled from Nicaragua. There's quite a brutal dictatorship in Nicaragua, and I can't go back to my country. So if you add that into the mix, sure, it comes down. But I'm healthy, and I get to do what I love for work. So I would say that's pretty 10 out of 10. Classic Bitcoiner optimism there. Love it. Okay. Wonderful. Mike, who are you? Where are you on the privilege scale?
Mike Peterson, definitely 10 out of 10, and that's why I realize how slanted the current financial system is, because I've realized how much privilege I've had and the successes I've had in life that I wouldn't have had if I was born somewhere else.
Okay, fantastic. Can we also give a round of applause for Mike, because I feel like we applauded everyone else. Good. So, being underprivileged and being privileged in 2024, or 2025 rather, they are very different ends of a spectrum. Brindon's already touched on the importance of Bitcoin within this, and yet we are in El Salvador, a underprivileged country when we look at all sorts of things, from access to education, stability, financial services, and just being in the global south. We are in a country where there should be millions and millions of people using this tool, Bitcoin, because it is this tool that unlocks privilege or unlocks financial privilege, let's say. So, why are there not millions of people in an underprivileged country such as El Salvador not using Bitcoin? And surely Bitcoin is not for the underprivileged if El Salvador isn't running with it and isn't adopting it in a meaningful way. Should we start with Mike at the end there? You fired up?
I think people underestimate how much we are creatures of habit in the way that we do things, especially when it comes to the money, because that's something that's very personal to us, and people, they don't like change. And so we've seen that in El Salvador, that it takes you actually like holding somebody's hand and walking them through several different transactions before they're willing to make that change. And so I think we need to kind of pull back a little bit and look at how remarkable it is that there has been as much Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador as there is. I mean, El Salvador went from probably one of the countries with the lowest Bitcoin adoption in the world to one of the countries with the highest. They've done surveys in El Salvador and asked people if they had heard of Bitcoin, if they knew what it was, and it was like 99+% of people had. That's higher than any other country in the world. And so I think that we are underestimating where we will be in 10 years and how much it will transform the opportunities that Salvadorans have just by making a judgment of what has happened in these first few years. So taking even to the US, if you look how long it took for Americans to adopt credit cards and for them to actually surpass the use of cash, it took multiple decades for that to happen. So the transition that we're seeing here in El Salvador is on a pace that greatly exceeds that. So I have a lot of hope.
Okay, awesome. Do you think there's a point in the future when El Salvador will be considered a privileged country, given the trajectory that it's on?
100%. I mean, I think you look at even the announcement recently that Tether is moving their global headquarters here. I mean, you're talking about a country or a company whose revenues, whose profits is higher than the total sum tax revenues that the government brings in. Like, they will bring in their trail swaths of other companies that provide high-paying jobs, opportunities, and so they've set the adoption of Bitcoin has set in motion something that I don't think anything can stop.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the echoes of that. I mean, we have the Google headquarters just out there. Personally, I just think it's a sticker on top of a tall building. I haven't actually seen these Google guys going around. But yeah, you can feel this sort of trend, this sort of emerging privilege, let's say, for want of a better word. Let's travel across to Africa. Brindon, how is it going in Kampala? How is it going in Uganda more at large? Are you seeing the underprivileged genuinely use Bitcoin, or are you seeing perhaps the middle class and the wealthier sort of echelons of society using Bitcoin over there?
In Uganda, it's very, very easy to see that underprivilege is by default. So every Ugandan who gets the chance at Bitcoin realizes that it's their tool to bypass a lot of limitations that the system puts on them. So I'll give an example just from the trip I was trying to take. I tried to book a flight using Visa, but because the transaction was from a Visa account based in Uganda, I could not complete it. I had to use an American Express card from a friend of mine who owns it from Canada. Shout out to Santosh. That alone, I will juxtapose with what we're doing with Bitcoin at the orphanage. We're using and receiving donations from all of you Bitcoiners, and we've been able to feed children for the last 2 years. On the Bitcoin standard, we are implementing Fruits for Sats every day. We are teaching the children about Bitcoin, and they can use it without having to plug into the system, which, by the way, requires them to have a form of identity. And they are orphans. They do not have identity. So Bitcoin is for the underprivileged on that level that regardless of who you are, you can plug in and access immediate financial benefits without any limits in terms of transactional value, in terms of what's your color, what's your race. It's that unlocking of capability that I find most amusing. On another frontier, what we're doing with our project in Uganda is we are buying a school with Bitcoin. But
so you can't buy a flight, but you can buy a school.
Yeah, we can't buy a school with Bitcoin, but we can't buy a flight with fiat with.
Well, but my point was, why didn't you buy the flight with Bitcoin as well?
I couldn't buy the flight with Bitcoin for two reasons. Because the flight booking system is a centralized system that is isolated from Bitcoin.
So you still have to KYC through that, so they still know that you're Ugandan.
The most immediate solution would have been Travala, but the late booking was not listed on the platform. So if the flight was on Travala, I could have paid for it with Bitcoin. But the point I'm trying to make is privilege relies on the medium of exchange to which you purchase that privilege. It's on a transactional layer that we experience privilege. So if Bitcoin comes in and bypasses the control that exists on that transactional layer, then the would-be underprivileged, I usually call them financially isolated, immediately plug into all these resources and benefits.
You kind of checkmated me there with the example of the orphanage. I was trying to work out a way to be like, well, they're not actually using Bitcoin, but then you explained that the orphanage is also onboarding people into this new financial system. Therefore, they are learning about Bitcoin before even learning about all those difficulties with Visa and MasterCard and those centralized, inherently underprivileged enhancing services. I'm supposed to be being the annoying journalist and I'm siding with you. Hang on. Yeah.
So what most people don't realize is being underprivileged is not realized until you need a certain service or need that exists on that layer. So for example, we have all of you here who would love to give us, let's say, 100 sats for the work that we do. I think you lack a privilege to do that on the traditional system. In that moment, if you wanted to send us a donation, you are underprivileged to do it on the traditional finance. So everyone here might as well be underprivileged in the fiat world without recognizing it. So Bitcoin presents us a chance, all of us, to exercise and practice financial freedom. I would call it that.
In short, fiat is underprivileged.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Piero, you were nodding your head there. Thank you so much, Brindon. Piero, you were nodding your head there, but then also tilting. Was there something you wanted to add?
There's a lot of things that have crossed my mind, but I would argue, instead of talking about it, let's look at the countries that have adopted Bitcoin the fastest. It's not the privileged countries. It's the countries that need the technology the most. Venezuela, Nigeria, Argentina. People don't want to save in Argentinian pesos. Now things have gotten better, but it's still not a strong currency. Venezuela and Bolivia are the same thing. People prefer a superior asset, harder money, and that is Bitcoin. And if you look at the States, in the States people have PayPal and Venmo. There is no need for Bitcoin. And thankfully in the States, there hasn't been a crazy dictatorship or a crazy prime minister like Trudeau that decides to freeze, truckers' funds and bank accounts. So people in the States are so privileged, they don't realize that the majority of the population in Latin America, 70% of the population, are either unbanked or underbanked. The unbanked have no financial services. They rely exclusively on physical bills. 100% of their life is in physical bills. That's about 40% of the population in Latin America. And 30% is underbanked, meaning they might have a bank account, but they can't send money across borders with their bank account. Essentially, they just have a checkbook, and they can take the money out of their bank account, but they can't do anything with their bank account. No access to credit or debit cards, etc. So obviously, and we've seen that the countries that need it the most adopted the fastest. And the countries that need it the most are the more underprivileged countries. So I think that's a very easy argument where we can see that just naturally humans adopt things because of necessity faster than just because something is cool and new, right? And Mike said credit cards were invented a while ago, in the 50s actually. In Latin America, only 9% of transactions occur in credit cards, meaning there's still lots of room to grow for credit card and debit card adoption, but you need a bank account to have that. And to have a bank account, you need to know how to read and write. Most people in Latin America are on the spectrum of illiteracy, so you can't sign the documents required to open a bank account. You need to travel to a bank branch. You need to have a proof of residence and a proof of address. There's just a bunch of hurdles that exist in the fiat system that keep the poor poor and to keep the poor excluded from the system. So there's a lot there to unpack, but definitely we are seeing that people that are less privileged are adopting this technology because of a need more than the countries that are privileged that don't need this technology.
Okay. I think you have kind of got me cornered there, but there's something I'm going to latch on to. We're going to go to Mike first.
I think one thing that is very important for people to understand, and if you're an American or from Europe, it's hard to wrap your mind around this, but we will never bring financial inclusion to the masses under the current system. And that is because of AML and KYC policies that exist. It will never be profitable to bank most of the people in the world. The friction and the cost of bringing people on with the current requirements, which just keep getting worse, not better, these will never be profitable customers. And so they will never be included. There is no way for us to bring these people and level the playing field under a centralized system that has a central point of attack, usually from the US government is the one doing the attacking. And so we need a system that is decentralized, that everybody is on the same playing field, that there are no gatekeepers, and that is the only way that we can bring everybody in to share the same privilege that we currently have in the developed world.
Okay, really well made point there. Feel free to applause. We can wake up the room a little bit as well. One thing, okay, I'm going to concede, then yeah, sure, maybe this Bitcoin system is slightly more privileged breaking down than the fiat system, sure. However, if we enter the Bitcoin system, I'm going to make the argument that there is actually a tremendous amount of privilege. There are privileged Bitcoiners and underprivileged Bitcoiners, and the way in which Bitcoin is scaling is sort of trending towards a more underprivileged system. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at, say, Peru and the circular economies that took place there, they started out onboarding people onto the Blue Wallet Lightning solution. And then Blue Wallet was like, oh, we're going to have to sunset this solution for whatever reason. So they moved to Phoenix Wallet, and then that was removed from the Peruvian app stores for a little while. And eventually they settled on Blink Wallet, which, great wallet, however, it's custodial. They could not find a non-custodial way to use Bitcoin in these circular economies. If you look at, 90% of the Bitcoin circular economies worldwide, apart from maybe Cuba, they are all using somewhat custodial solutions, which is an underprivileged way of using Bitcoin. I'm going to go to Cuba now as an example. There, they have to do things non-custodially because none of these apps, or very few of these apps, are available to download in Cuba due to the restrictions from the US and other countries about their system. So in a weird way, you have the most underprivileged country arguably in the world, it's on a par with Iran or Venezuela or Afghanistan, and it's using Bitcoin in the purest, most privileged way. And yet we as Bitcoiners, we cheer on and we celebrate underprivileging solutions such as custodial Lightning wallets. Help me square that circle. Help me understand why Piero's done a big sigh there. I think I might have got you guys. What do we think? Mike, do you want to try to address that point?
Sure. I think that you're just not being realistic about the trade-offs between custodial and non-custodial solutions. There is, of course, we want everybody to hold their own keys. We want them to have that capability, and they do. Even in all of these projects, as people's funds that they're holding rise to the level where it warrants that, they make that step, they get hardware wallets, or they go to some other form of wallet that they can hold their own keys. But we have to be realistic that the custodial wallets provide a usability advantage. Even for people of privilege like myself, I would prefer to usually use a custodial wallet for my day-to-day purchases because it's just such a better experience. Hopefully in the future that will change, but for now, that's the best experience. But it's not one or the other. You use these two things in conjunction so that you hold within your custodial wallet the same amount of money you would feel comfortable walking down the street with. You're not going to put your life savings in your pocket as you're walking down the street because somebody could rug you. The same thing with your wallet. Your custodial wallet, you just hold the amount that you're going to spend, and you keep everything else in a non-custodial solution.
So are we agreeing then that that is a form of underprivilege then? I don't know if you've directly addressed that claim that, using custodial Lightning wallets is less privileged.
No,
or is it
no,
not?
I disagree. I think I think all of us, whether we're privileged or not, I would still choose to use a custodial solution for my day-to-day spending just because it's a better user experience. That doesn't negate the fact that I'm going to hold any significant Bitcoin I have in a more secure, non-custodial form where I hold my own keys. I don't think it has to be one or the other.
Okay. Piero?
This might get me lynched by Maxis, but I really, Osmo, our solution, is a custodial solution. And the only way I got into Bitcoin in 2015 was because, thanks to Coinbase. No, now I'm no longer a huge fan of Coinbase, but back then it was the gateway, which made it really easy for me to get in. And again, out of the 10 out of 10, I'm pretty privileged. I'm educated. I speak English and Spanish. I know how to read and write. And Coinbase made it really easy. I had wanted to buy Bitcoin since 2012, and it was just way too overwhelming for me to understand. I'm not a developer. It was like too overwhelming. And I think we underestimate how overwhelming, rather, it can be, especially for non-technical people or people that are in the spectrum of illiteracy, to just expect them to go and hold their keys in English, mind you, because all seed phrases are in English. Sure, there are ways to create seed phrases in Spanish, but then you can't recover them in another wallet. If you want to input Spanish seed phrases into a Trezor wallet, you can't. So really, it's actually a privilege to have a custodian solution, again, as long as you understand the risks and as long as you don't have all of your savings in a custodian. But it makes it a lot easier for adoption. I didn't have the privilege to have something like Coinbase before 2015, and after that, I managed to get in, and it starts little by little, and now obviously I know how to use Bitcoin and save my seed phrase, etc., but it didn't start like that. It started with baby steps, and I think it's actually a huge privilege for the countries like El Salvador and others that have custodial solutions that make it really easy and really familiar, because there's a bunch of countries where it's just a headache. How do you even get into Bitcoin? No on and off ramps, seed phrases in English when English is not the first language in the country. These are just 12 to 24 words that don't mean anything to people in Pakistan or people in Nicaragua. So I would actually argue that having custodial solutions is a big privilege.
And just to follow up real quick, what we see is when Americans come down to El Salvador, they are the underprivileged because all the wallets we'd recommend, they're on the banned list with Iran and North Korea. And so they can't use the wallets that we'd recommend.
Brilliant. I think, though, inadvertently there, Piero, you've kind of made a point that Bitcoin is for the privileged, because currently the available solutions, or the easiest onboarding path into Bitcoin, is via English-speaking resources, is via a smartphone that's reliably connected to the internet. So we're not really addressing a lot of the world, and we're not addressing a lot of the world that is fundamentally underprivileged.
As Bitcoiners, I think we're failing as Bitcoiners to do that. Obviously, in each country, we're doing, as Bitcoiners, things that are local solutions for those problems. So Osmo is in Spanish because it's made by Latinos for Latinos. But definitely, for you to get into Bitcoin, on-chain, self-sovereign, you need to speak English at this point in time. And the smartphone thing doesn't bother me. In Latin America, there's over 90% smartphone penetration. So, and I mean, in a matter of 5 years, it'll be over 100% smartphone penetration. So even the underprivileged and the underbanked and the unbanked and people in the spectrum of illiteracy have a smartphone. So that's no longer, a thing that makes you privileged or underprivileged. But not speaking English and having seed phrases only in English, I think this should be a wake-up call for the Bitcoiners, core Bitcoiners in the room, that we should make it more inclusive.
Okay. So are we seeing more, countries making solutions for their own countries? Are we seeing more Africa-centric or more Ugandan-centric solutions for Ugandans or for Africans, writ large? What do you think, Brindon?
I wanted to first comment on this, then I'll supplement. I wanted to share and say Bitcoin is a self-equilibrium mechanism whereby, depending at which point in life you are, that you get to meet Bitcoin, it will give you the most immediate privilege that you need. I don't think it would be right to compare the privilege, or underprivileged when they are in different parts of the Bitcoin curve. When an orphan at our project is looking to Bitcoin, they are not in a hurry to understand the inflation. They are not in a hurry to understand the self-custody or the non-custodial. They're trying to eat. And if a Bitcoin donation can come through, they don't care how it converts into food. So to them, it is very important for Bitcoin, in whichever way it manifests, to enable them reach the privilege of a meal. To the white person across the room who has a big savings account and they are trying to not lose money to government printing, the privilege they are trying to get to is have it in an asset that appreciates over time. So we have to understand that it's a curve. Depending on where you are in that curve, eventually we are using Bitcoin to teach these children English. So the privilege demand kind of grows according to that curve. So it would be wrong to try and compare the two forms of privilege and use them to make a conclusion. About the solutions, Bitcoin is open source and allows us to all build according to our communities. That's a very big advantage, that as Bitcoiners, we are not doing enough to make people realize that it's possible. Machankura is the one that always comes to head. We were all used to USSD in Africa, and now we have a way of transacting Bitcoin using USSD.
For those that don't know what USSD is, what is that very briefly?
So USSD is when you have the normal old button phone, you dial codes that allow you to send and receive Bitcoin. That is possible right now in Africa, and it is a system that we were used to prior to the creation of Bitcoin. So there are all these innovative ways to deal with community-based problems, which is unlike the fiat layer. And that is why I stand with the argument of Bitcoin is for the underprivileged, because at different stages of life, we need different privileges. And Bitcoin enables us to get to our privileges regardless of where we are on that curve.
Okay, and one of the few things, feel free to applause. One of the stats I love about Africa is that Africa has like more than 110% dumb phone penetration, and it's like 60-something% smartphone penetration. So like every African has at least one phone of some sort. And most of the time, yeah, it's those tiny Nokia 3310 things. So yeah, it is an underprivileged centric solution. I have 2 minutes, and I wanted to bring up the little ace up my sleeve, and that is that UTXOs, we all know there are not enough UTXOs. I'm so sorry, this is the jet lag talking. I arrived yesterday afternoon, so it's 3 a.m. for me. UTXOs, there aren't enough UTXOs to go around. Therefore, Bitcoin is clearly an underprivileging system, because there will be people with UTXOs and there will be people without. And there will be the plebs who are trying to get on-chain and they can't, and they have to use layer 2, layer 3 solutions in 10, 15 years' time. But it also could be tomorrow if the US randomly adopts Bitcoin as legal tender. You know, the blockchain will be completely crammed with all of these new users. So what do you say to that, to my last argument to put forward? You know, you're just going to laugh. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
I'd like to answer your question using my previous analogy. Is the worry of a UTXO is a worry of an educated Bitcoiner. It is the worry of you who understands the privilege of having a UTXO. My biggest goal is to use Bitcoin in its current form to get my person who has to choose between lunch and dinner, or having it in between as one meal, to the level where they can worry about a UTXO. If I can leverage Bitcoin to do that, I feel like they can figure out the rest. So the worry that you have is based on the privilege curve that you are at, and Bitcoin will always serve you.
Yeah, checkmate. Well played.
I'd love to add something, just to leave a little token out there for the non-Latinos in the room. But as Latin Americans, we lack investment opportunities and investment options. I'm from, as I said, Latin America, and I can't buy stocks in the US. I could open an account with Fidelity and blah, blah, blah. It cost me 25 grand. You need to be rich to be able to buy stocks as a Latin American in the US. There's no Robinhood or any of those apps here. So I don't know of any other asset, hard asset, that allows the underbanked to buy with cash a little piece of 21 million. And I think that makes Bitcoin for the underprivileged. There is no other investment opportunity. There's real estate. You need so much capital to buy a piece of land, but you need less than $1 to buy a little bit of Bitcoin.
Fair. I'm sorry, Mike, we were going to come to you.
No, I don't have anything to add. They left it in good hands there.
They did really well. Okay, let's get a quick show of hands. There's the last seconds here. Who thinks Bitcoin is for the underprivileged? Raise your hand if you think it's for the underprivileged. Oh, damn it. Okay, who thinks Bitcoin is for the privileged? Fewer hands go up. What the hell? It's clearly for the privileged too, guys. Come on. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. Thank you so much to Plan B for hosting us. Give it up for Mike, for Piero, and for Brindon. Bitcoin is for the underprivileged. Thank you so much.